On today's episode of Watch Time, we're bringing Joshua Lawhorn back to the podcast, and we're going to be talking about what to expect when you ask for raw footage from your video production company right after this. Welcome back to Watch Time, everybody. We're here again with Joshua Lawhorn, our expert video production, video editing professional.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. And today I'm excited to talk to you about basically what to really expect for a client when they're asking for raw footage, because I do notice that there are a lot of companies, at least working with us, that are asking for, hey, can I get a flash drive, get a hard drive? I think there's a lot of companies across the board doing that. Just with other professionals as well, it makes sense because you want to repurpose this. But I kind of want to let our viewers and listeners know what to expect, because I think they are going to be a little overwhelmed, and I think they may be a little disappointed if they don't know what they're getting into.
Yeah, I'm big on metaphors, and I guess the best way to explain this is like when we record our video and audio, it's like we have, raw ingredients, and then we're giving them to our client and asking them to make the soup or food, dinner, whatever. They're going to have to chop up the carrots. They're going to have to boil the water. It's not a finished product.
I think that's a great metaphor to look at. I look at it as like, this is a great example that you chose to explain it that way, because how many times has somebody, and I'm sure that people can relate to this, gone to a restaurant and been like, that looks awesome, I'm going to make that at home. And you go look up the recipe and you make it at home and you're like, it looks nothing like I just bought.
I suck at Thai food.
Yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. And that's where I think, looking at these ingredients per se that we're going to be giving the client to start working from, I think it's important to discuss that. And I think we can kind of start off just by, let's address, log footage, because I think one thing that you need to realize is when you get this footage, it's not going to look like it does in the final product.
Yeah, we shoot on Sony cameras, and when we first started, we were like shooting in the standard color profiles, which is typically what you'd see. If you were to watch like a YouTube video or commercial, you'd see like, nice, bright, vibrant colors.
Would you say it's kind of like, for people that are like watching or listening, like if they're not in the video field, like it's if you were to take the camera right out the box and just hit record?
Yeah, it's kind of like what your eye sees. But we started shooting in S-Log3 because that offered us the comfortability and flexibility in post to kind of, get the best of those colors, the widest palette of colors that we could possibly get to make the video look like we want it to look, like the client wants it to look.
I think it's important here, just for everyone that's watching and listening. So if you're thinking to yourself, what is S-Log? What is log? Let's take it back a second just to kind of explain to them.
Yeah, and like every camera has a form of log too.
Yes.
I guess we should explain that as well.
Yeah, so it's S-Log is S for Sony, so Sony log. And, like you have...
Ari has C-Log, Canon has a C-Log, Red has like log 3 G10.
So it's specific to the manufacturer.
Yeah.
So they all have a log, but the letter or numbers that follow, either start or follow, might be specific to them.
They're a form of log that company does. It's just like a mathematical equation, essentially, to how their cameras work with color.
So why don't we explain, I guess, just to the people that are kind of watching and listening, what is the difference if you're looking at a piece of log footage that say they get this hard drive or flash drive from us, they pop this video open, they go, I want to see what kind of clips there are that I can start using. So like, what are they going to notice first when they open up a log clip?
Immediately they're going to notice everything looks extremely flat, white.
Washed out?
It washed out. Yeah, it might seem overexposed to them. It might seem brighter than it should be. And that's because with Sony cameras, you have to expose them somewhere between 1 to 2 stops over in order to get the proper highlight, shadow, and black levels that you need to create the richest possible product.
Okay, so I guess and how I want to, and correct me if I'm wrong. So the way I'm going to kind of simplify this for everybody, just because they might not know color, maybe they know a little bit about video, but in case you guys that are watching and listening don't know, this is really important because when you look at something, when you look at a film, when you look at a really well produced video, you probably notice that these colors, they look just really good, like
They pop,
rich and yeah.
contrasty. They might be saturated or desaturated. It just depends on what you're going for that specific video.
Well, it's that feeling too, because like if you watch a movie, like some movies might have a greenish hue to the whole movie. Some might have an orangish hue, or
Yeah.
colors look a little differently. But it's because of the emotion that you're trying to
Elicit.
yeah, to the
elicit in your
viewer,
audience, yeah.
or you're trying to preserve. To your point, like maybe you're shooting when it's a little darker than normal, or maybe you're shooting when it's a little brighter than normal, and you're trying to do your best to preserve everything. So when you get into the edit suite, when you actually cut this up, you can adjust those colors to make everything look more visually appealing than you could if you were just shooting in a standard mode.
Yes, yeah. And another reason to shoot in log would be because, especially with Sony cameras are known for being awesome under low light.
So you need to be in log to shoot in low light.
Yeah, well, you don't need to. It just offers it affords you the opportunity to maybe, shoot at a higher ISO with little to no noise. Whereas with other cameras, you'd have to bring in heavy lights and, really light the scene up. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to see anything. It's just going to be completely black. It'll be really noisy. And Sony cameras afford you that opportunity and that flexibility.
So just for everybody that's watching and listening, when we talk about noise, like if you think about, I like to think about snow, for example. Snow is a great example. So imagine a black screen, and it's just pure black. So you're looking at absence of color. Now imagine like light snow, just kind of in there. Like you just see a little bit of light snow maybe going through there, and it's light. It's not like it's like right in your face, but it's just all over the place. And that's what that noise looks like. It's if you've ever seen something like a picture that looks really grainy.
Yeah, grainy.
That's
It's
noise.
old film grain, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just the noise that's introduced. It's when not enough light is hitting your camera sensor. Wouldn't you agree? It can appear like really muddy.
Yeah.
And like very soft, and it's like it's
sharp.
It's an unpleasing image,
So, I mean, I guess with that, the reason why we're, and so those of you that are like listening and watching us right now thinking like, wow, like I have no idea what they're talking about, or there maybe like we may even be a little bit in the weeds, I feel like, too, for like our standard viewer. But the reason why we're trying to give you this information is because, you're going to want this footage, and that's fine. And you should, I'm a firm believer, you should have a copy of it. You should be able to use it. You paid for it. But we want to try and just give you a heads up on what to expect when you open it, because the shots that you see in that final video are not going to be the clips you're going to pop open when you're getting this from a professional video production company. I mean, you might be able to hire a videographer, a solo videographer, and say, we just want footage, we're going to cut it up, and they won't shoot it in log. And that's because they know you're going to be editing it. And that's why we always ask clients a lot of times, like they'll hire us and they go, well, we need you to cover this. And I say, well, are we editing it? Because if we're not editing it, then, if you're just going to get it, then we won't shoot it in log. We'll shoot it in something else, because you're not going to take the time to make these super rich colors and do all this work to make this video like as professional as we're going to make it, especially if it's going on social media. You just need some footage that looks good. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be cinematic. It just needs to be decent footage. So there's a difference there. Or even if we're working with people, we'll often ask sometimes like, well, who's editing it? Can we talk to them? Because some editors do have a preference on how this is shot and recorded. So I guess, I
guess just to stop you too,
Yeah.
there are some workarounds with log. Like I know with the Sony FX3, which is a camera that I shoot on, you can actually do what's called baking in the LUT. So the LUT is the lookup table. It's a mathematical equation that essentially brings your washed out log footage to baseline. It adds a little bit more saturation, a little bit more contrast, and you can actually record that LUT on top of your log footage, and that's a really good starting point. It's almost like shooting in your standard picture profile.
Okay, so there's some options.
There are options, yes. But not with every camera.
Okay, but with our cameras, there are some options.
Yes.
So important thing to think about. These are all things, and like I said, this is a lot of in-depth information that we're giving, but we just kind of want to show, the viewer and the listener, like there's a lot that goes into this, and when you get this drive and you open it up, just expect this. There's a good possibility that it was shot in log. You're going to look at this and be like, what is this footage? This is not the beautiful footage that I have.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to think about.
And your computer, like when you go to open up that file, it might not even be able to read it. Like if you're shooting with a camera like an FX6 or an FX9, or if you're lucky enough a Venice or an ARRI or something like that, it's going to be a different file type. Like I know with the FX9, it's an MKV, and that is a much heavier file, and you can't open that up in QuickTime.
So depending on the camera it's shot on, you might not even be able to view it.
Exactly.
You might not even be able to view it
editing
in your
software.
Yeah, you'll need Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro. I don't even know. I'd be curious to know if you can open it up in iMovie or something along those lines.
I couldn't even tell you about that.
So professional video editing footage to be able to view some of this stuff. So that's something to consider too, depending on who you're working with, what they're shooting on. And these are all important questions I do feel to ask in pre-production. If you're a company or a marketing agency and you're thinking, okay, we're having this video produced and we'd like to be able to utilize some of this video footage for our own marketing efforts, social media, internal use, let your video production company know that, because maybe it's not giving you the raw files from that video per se. Maybe it's hiring a second shooter to come out and just shoot video footage for you, or having another camera available to get video footage that you can use for that. And if you don't know that in advance, if you don't tell the company in advance, they're not going to be able to do that. So this is something, if this is part of your strategy, we'll reuse that footage. Let the company know, because it could make a huge difference, because this way it eliminates the disappointment when either you can't view the footage, because you can't open it, or it's log footage and you don't know how to color grade it or put a lookup table on it. And another thing to consider when we're talking about this, why this file size might not open, or if you're not familiar on how to edit, you might get files that are in different frame rates.
Yes. Yeah, so typically what we do is when we shoot interviews, we'll shoot in 24 frames per second. If it's broadcast, we'll shoot in 30. And
those are the standard frame rates. 24 is more cinematic. That's more of a film feel. And then 30 is broadcast, just in case you were wondering.
And then we will also shoot in 60 frames per second, sometimes 120. For our B-roll, usually a combination between the 24, 60, 120.
What's the value in that, 60 to 120?
So we've all seen like a really cool YouTube video or commercial where the footage will be in slow motion, and then it might speed up and go back to slow motion. You can't do that in 24 frames per second because there aren't enough frames in the shot, it'll look really choppy. But when you shoot in 60 is, I believe, 60% more frames than 24 frames per second. So it just gives you that flexibility to actually slow it down, and it doesn't look super choppy. It looks smooth. It looks really smooth, yeah.
So that's something I guess to consider too, because when you're talking about 60% more frames, right? So even just using 30 frames per second, 60 is double that. So that's double the file size at that point, because you're capturing double the amount of frames from that camera. And then 120, you're capturing
5 times.
Okay, yeah. So there you go. So now you're talking about 5 times the amount. So that's something to consider too. Like when you get these files, if you open it up, and it's like, why are these files so big? Well, maybe there's more room to slow things down. And if you're getting these files from your video production company, this is an important thing to note, not only because it's going to be tasking on your computer if you don't have an editing computer, but maybe if you do have an in-house editing computer or in-house marketing person that maybe dabbles in editing or knows editing to some extent, that's valuable knowledge because they can do a little bit more with that. And you may even notice like the handheld stuff, like it looks shaky in the raw footage, but like they slowed it down and it looks so great in the video.
Yeah. And it also just like it affords you the opportunity. You know, you might need like 1 second extra on that shot. And if you shoot it in 24 and it's all shaky, you don't have it. But if it's in 60, you might have it. You can extend that clip out.
Yeah, you can smooth it out because you have that smooth motion now. It's nice and like smooth slow motion. And then you can also in post production stabilize that and make it look almost like, you know, you're on some type of
tripod or a gimbal. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've talked about frame rate and, you know, we talked about like using slow motion and that can add file size, I think another important thing to really think about for people like when they get these raw files is that there are other things that we do as video production professionals that cause the file sizes to be bigger. One, you know, most people that are listening and watching are probably aware of 4K and HD. You know, that's been around. So you know that 4K is a much bigger file size. You have greater resolution, and you can punch in if you're exporting it as HD. So you already know that's going to cause a lot of larger file sizes. But another thing maybe we can just kind of touch on slightly without trying to confuse people is just talking about like 10-bit versus 8-bit. Because I know we shoot in 10-bit. Most cameras that you would go pick up from like a Best Buy or maybe lower end cameras are probably shooting in 8-bit still. But can we just talk about just why we shoot in 10-bit and why that's going to cause a larger file size?
Well, okay. So what you're referring to is the color bit depth.
Yes.
Okay, and 8-bit. Sometimes you'll see like a 420 or a 422. Essentially, that just means how much, like how wide your palette of colors is. So on 8-bit, you don't have as much flexibility in post to. I mean, you still have a decent amount of flexibility, but the difference between 8-bit and 10-bit is something like, I think, millions of colors that you get with the 10-bit. So just your variations of red, variations of green, variations of blue. It's magical what you can do in post with 10-bit as opposed to 8.
So we shoot in 10-bit because as video production professionals, we have the ability to play with these colors a lot more than people that don't necessarily know what they're doing. So that's going to cause a larger file size. And then let's talk a little bit about, this isn't so much about file size, but I did want to touch on sound. Because sound is something that I know, you know, we've had clients where we've recorded stuff and they're like, wow, I don't know how you're going to get that noise out of there. I don't know how you're going to work around this. And we do. And I think it's important for people to understand if they're going to get raw footage, they're going to get raw audio, and just, I guess, you know, what to expect. Like, what are we doing in post-production that maybe they're not seeing? Because they're only seeing the end result.
Yeah, so, you know, bare minimum, we're adding an equalizer. We might be adding a limiter. Oftentimes we're adding a denoiser, and we might even be, you know, I know this is the taboo word right now, but we might be using some AI to adjust the audio and really, you know, make it sound crisp, make it sound, because most people don't think, you know, when they think of video, especially video professionals, they get caught up in the weeds about how good the shots look and how well edited the video is, and then they forget about audio. And audio is, you know, it might be it is your most important aspect, in my opinion, in video, because I think music is magical, I think sound is magical, and I think people will notice that they will think that your video is less quality if your audio is not on point. It stands out immediately.
I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, and I know we're planning on having some episodes to discuss audio a little bit more in the future. But really, when you think about it, like for anybody that's watching and listening, think about a video that you've seen, and think about if the color's not quite right or the shots aren't as visually pleasing. Like, you'll still watch the video.
Yeah.
But if that audio is messed up,
I might be dating myself a little bit, but Oppenheimer's in theaters right now. And for anyone who's seen that movie, especially in IMAX, I mean, that movie is beautiful to look at, but it's also so commanding. The sound, it's like, your seat is vibrating, and how Christopher Nolan, used sound to really build up to the dropping of the nuclear bomb was masterful. And I think that that's like what people take away from that film the most is how beautiful the sound is, and like that's what the cinema going experience is about.
I think part of the reason why video is so successful in terms of like being able to get your message across and be able to be an effective marketing tool, people just think it's visual. They just think, well, the visuals, like, but they forget it's the audio and the visual together that create that experience. And so that's why it's important for us to spend time sweetening the audio, working on the audio. One thing I did want to mention, without getting too much into the weeds, is there are some different audio formats out there that allow us to capture, just like how in video you can capture more colors, there's more bits, more bit depth. There's also the same thing in audio. And there's a term out there, without going into it, it's called 32-bit float audio, and a lot of people are starting to record that. And it is very possible that your audio could be recorded in that format, and what that does is it preserves the highs and lows and allows you to adjust the audio without adjusting the noise floor. So what that means for those of you that are getting this is you might hear very quiet audio and think, oh my gosh, they gave me this audio and it's horrible. Like, it's like they're whispering. Well, it's because they recorded it in 32-bit float, and you have to take that into your video editing software and adjust it to be able to get the right levels.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I know this was a lot of content that we kind of threw at everybody. I know we kind of did some deep dive on a few of these things, but I did want to just recap for everybody. Really, the whole point of this podcast and why we wanted to do this is just because I've noticed, and I know you have too, like we were talking about it, just more of our clients wanting their raw footage. Can I get that on a flash drive? Can I get that on a hard drive? Just want to hold on to it. We want to repurpose it. We want to reuse it, and you should. But like I said, I do think that it's good to know that up front. But also, I feel like this is something that's maybe being used more across the board for all kinds of video production companies, because there is a need for more social media content. There is a need to repurpose things and try and get the most bang for your buck, as a consumer. So just keep in mind, when you ask for this footage, unless you're letting that company know up front, so they can maybe shoot in a different format for you or make some adjustments, just know that you could get that log footage. So it's possible you'll open it up and it'll look washed out and desaturated, and you'll have to do some work to that. Just know that the file sizes might be too big to open on your computer. You may not even be able to open some of these files because of the camera they shot in, so keep that in mind. Yeah. And know that there's a lot of work that might need to be done. If it's a higher bit rate, you might have to do some work with the colors, because you kind of have to play with them to get them where they need to be. And then sound-wise, there's a lot of work that goes into the sound, so you might hear the audio and be like, man, I can hear the trucks going by in the background, but I didn't hear it on my video.
Yeah.
So that there was work done to that. And just like I talked about that 32-bit float, it might sound like they're whispering, but it just needs work. So just keep these things in mind. I think it's great to want to have that and have a backup. I think it's great to pull from that, but just know what you're getting yourself into when you ask for it. And like I said, I'm very big on let's have these conversations up front, or before you ask to request that drive, just ask the videographer that you're working with or the production company, say, hey, I've been thinking about it. Is it possible to get that footage at this point? And then say, what format's that in? Is it going to be easy for me to edit? Because maybe if it makes sense, if you want to reuse it, maybe it's a conversation with the company saying, okay, well, instead of giving me the raw footage and I have to pay you for a hard drive and shipping, what would it look like if you could just pull 20 clips for me, color grade them, and send them to me, and I can reuse them in social media? That might be a better option.
Exactly, yeah.
So, but thank you, Josh, for coming on today and lending your expertise and talking about this.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So thanks, guys, so much, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Watch Time. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode.
And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.
And if you want your question answered on our podcast, go to flexmediacle.com/watchtime.